Welcome everyone to the Alaska Bigfoot Studies. Big shout out to all my viewers and all my supporters, especially patrons like Jomo, who every Sunday morning gathers all his kids around the tube and they get their fill of Chuke's Sunday morning cartoon Bigfoot goodness. I hope everyone had a good New Year's. I can't believe it's 2024 already. It's just amazing how time flies and everything that has happened in the past year, really the past couple years, but I wanted to revisit the idea of military and government involvement and knowledge of Bigfoot and Sasquatch and cryptids like that, because, I mean, you think about it, it has to be happening. It has to be happening. And we have evidence, you know, in the 80s, there's documents from the 60s to the 80s, the CIA was doing experiments with psychics and, you know, some of that stuff that gets way out there. We don't have too many official documents that talk about cryptids, but it's got to be happening. We know UFOs are being looked into, researched, and a portion of UFO studies, encounters, do have Sasquatch-like beings sighted right after or during the UFO, you know, experience sighting. So it's just bizarre. The whole the whole cabal is very bizarre. But I do think that at the very least, government entities have some knowledge of these Sasquatch creatures that are out there. One school of thought, and we've got all kinds of reports and these stories that come about talking about especially special forces and special units that have extremely high clearance and black ops going out to kind of hunt these creatures and actually seeking DNA. So who knows if some kind of research is being done or cloning. And I mean, the whole chupacabra story is, you know, one of the stories is that it escaped from a government, a U.S. research facility that was actually out of our borders in Mexico or somewhere in Central America, and that this creature escaped. And those stories are really interesting because they do find livestock drained of blood. And the chupacabra creature is just, I don't know, it's creepy because it's kind of like some of the creatures we see up here. But we do have stories where there are special units seeking and hunting Bigfoot. The one story that I researched once up here, it was a special forces unit, but we don't have special forces units that are just based here in Alaska, but they do come up regularly and train. It was a cold winter training and use the bases and, you know, at least the airstrip. And anyways, they have done training. Absolutely, that's been documented up here. And one of these stories was up kind of just past the Brooks Range, where a special forces unit in the winter time was training, and then they spotted just this odd Yeti-like creature. They followed some tracks, and evidently the tracks disappeared. So it ended up being almost a bizarre story because we, once again, you know, these creatures seem to be able to fade out of existence. And that makes me think that government, military would want to study these creatures even more just because of some of the abilities they have. So it's really interesting. Let's check in with Rob Roy Menzies. I'm slowly getting the band back together. I was a little too short this week to fit Beans Baxter. He just had a birthday. Happy birthday to Beans Baxter. And he wasn't able to get a video for us, but I will be going down to the Cosmic Hamlet by the Sea sometime in the next few months to visit him and do some investigations and in-person interviews with him. So happy birthday to Beans. And I was able to stop by the shop. Now business has died down a little bit, but we did have some visitors. So shout out to Freaky Deaky. They are an Alaska-based paranormal investigation podcast that popped in the shop. So it was like a big paranormal investigator conference at the shop today at the Bigfoot Art Gallery. So let's check in with Rob Roy Menzies. A couple more things to talk about. So one thing I find really interesting, I keep hearing these stories of government and military involvement or them knowing about Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything
I've
like
read
that?
a lot of stories, sure. It's fun. Especially, I love the military teams that go out to kill,
Right.
troubled families or ones that are getting harassing people.
Oh, okay.
There's been some stories I've heard. I can't verify them or anything. They're great stories.
Right.
I love them. But it seems, though, the military, our government, would know about these things by now. And
Right.
personally, I think if the Bigfoots are out there, I think our government knows.
Right.
The military as well, I'm sure they've had them on a table trying to figure out how they can, capitalize on some of the freaky stuff they do or study them.
Weaponize a Bigfoot.
Weaponize it, or, that's kind of what they do.
Right.
But also, maybe they are unique. Maybe they do have two vocal cords, and maybe they can do something with the lighting of their fur, and it appears they can morph colors like an octopus.
Oh,
You know what
wow.
I mean? They can disappear.
So have you-
but I don't
right,
know.
stories like that.
Yeah.
What's up with the vocal cord? I haven't.
I've heard because they can howl in the range of their voice. They can go from these deep guttural frequencies where we can't even really hear them
Right.
to these outlandish screams in like less than a second. So there are some people studying that maybe they have two vocal cords.
Right.
And you've probably heard the double teeth too. I've heard rumors that.
Oh, what's up with that?
I think it's part of the Nephilim crew.
Okay.
I've heard
Second
not,
row
not
of
often, but like they have two rows of teeth. And I don't know if that's just a rumor that people like to tell. Until I see one for myself and
Right.
have it in my garage and open its mouth,
Yeah.
which I'd love to do. I want to be able to draw one. But that's among some of the strangeness I've heard.
The Nephilim theory I kind of like because it's interesting. It goes back, thousands of years to the
Yeah.
story of, fallen angels
It's
wedding
interesting.
the human women and then
Yeah.
making these giants, which in turn would, it would describe some of the creatures people are seeing out there, and those
it's
are
fascinating.
like mean
the
creatures.
The mounds that are in Minnesota.
Oh,
I might
right.
be wrong with that, but
Ohio or something.
the giants. There's a couple brothers that did a show. It's
Yeah.
actually a pretty good show, but they were investigating giants, and
Right.
the myth and the rumors. And,
Yeah.
and what they were finding was, like the Smithsonian.
Right.
Collecting up these large giants and stashing them, and no one will ever see them again.
I've heard that before.
Like
yeah.
suppressing it. They don't want anybody to know about it.
Right.
And I could see that.
Yeah.
Because our government, and I always say, well, our government doesn't want people knowing there's Bigfoot
Right.
because of the amount of paperwork it would cause them.
Yeah.
Oh, they would have to re-regulate things and blah, blah.
And then you'd have hunters going out, and
I
it would
think
be
that's
a
a
big
lot
mess.
of what it really could be, because
Yeah.
I've worked for the government and it's slow.
Yeah.
And boy, that would be a total mind, blank for them
Right.
to have to write all this stuff up for this Bigfoot.
Well, they're finally admitting that, UAPs, UFOs are real.
Yeah.
So it makes you think, maybe
When's
someday.
the Bigfoot coming out?
Right. Yeah.
And you saw the reception of the UFO. It was kind of like everybody just kind of,
Right.
it
Let's
was like
move
this
on to the
man.
next topic.
I'm like, holy crap.
Yeah.
They're real. I knew it.
Yeah.
So maybe the Bigfoot will come out and no one will ever kind of be scratching their head. Yeah, so what?
Right.
It seems to be the kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I would be ecstatic, but
I know you had one sighting of a soldier coming in and telling you about how he saw something.
yeah, this was a National Guard unit that was up north somewhere. I'm not familiar where they were. They were on an exercise. A unit, they were staying overnight. I think it was in the wintertime. But they were on this kind of mountain, but there was other mountains that are much bigger. Well, one of them spotted something walking up the mountain, and they all pull out their big, high-speed Army binoculars, and the whole unit was watching this thing.
Yeah.
And the commanders who told me this,
Right.
and he said that it was a Bigfoot.
Wow.
And they watched this thing walk pretty briskly up the side of a mountain
Yeah.
on 2 legs.
Wow.
I remember I worked on Fort Rich when he told me that. I was
Right.
pretty impressed with that story.
That is
Yeah, matter of
awesome.
fact, he came in here about a year ago and reintroduced. I didn't recognize him because it's been 12, 13 years.
Right.
But yeah, we got talking, chit-chatting about it again. But
It-
yeah, I think, the military seems to be, I've heard stories. I've heard
Yeah, and it
stories.
makes you wonder because they do so many exercises out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
They're doing cold weather camping, and then
Yeah.
you've got helicopter crews that are going really far and doing exercises where they'll bring extra fuel or have somebody
Right.
refuel them, and they're going like where nobody else goes.
That's
so.
right. And the other thing I've heard, I heard it from one of the soldiers that was part of this incident, I think down in Washington.
Yeah.
They were doing the same thing. They're out on a overnight,
Yeah.
the whole unit, and something ran through the camp and almost stepped on the commander in his
wow.
sleeping bag. And he was laying there. He said this thing ran over him, ran on 2 legs.
Yeah.
And I think it goes on from that, but I actually recorded that story. He told us out at Area A in the cabin.
Wow.
The gentleman was out there as a Army Ranger, Army. So he told us this whole story about him and his unit out one night. The other thing is they have blanks. They don't have real. When they're out on these
Exercises,
overnighters,
yeah.
they're shooting blanks, so they can't. If they engage something,
Yeah.
they can't really do it but make noise.
Right.
But it would be a little unnerving out there.
Yeah.
I would feel safer with a whole unit of Army guys.
Right.
But I'd imagine the excitement goes through them. But it's a pretty incredible story. One day I'll have to release that. I videotaped the whole interview. So
Awesome.
it was pretty good.
And it's interesting because there's a difference between the service members that relate stories that they might have seen on an outing or their unit, and then the actual, intelligence and command
Yeah.
who might know something, but you need like clearance
Right.
to get that information.
Yes. And of course, the UFO, we're all familiar with,
Right.
military. They all have to be real tight-lipped about it.
Yeah.
And I can see that. You don't want to be unprofessional or dubbed a crackpot.
It's national security stuff too.
Yeah, national security, all that, drug tests. You got, if you say something,
Right.
people are like, oh, you're a weirdo,
Yeah.
No, that's the problem when you see something incredible.
Yeah.
It's hard to convince people you saw it. It's a great story.
Right.
But I always wonder what they think in the end of the day when they walk away and go home. Are they really go, that guy's nuts?
Yeah.
But I think it's a lot of fun.
It is.
So,
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir.
yeah.
Well, I always really enjoy all of Rob's insights into all this, and every time I stop by the shop, which is at least once a month, I get new stories and I just get to catch up with them. But we're really looking forward to this spring and summer and fall because we're going to be camping with the dogs, cooking up steak. Hopefully Beans will come by, and we're going to do investigations while we're out just enjoying camping. And we do have some hot spots that we want to check out. But back to the military connection of Bigfoot. When it comes to Alaska, every time I think of the story of Gabriel Fox, it's just such a bizarre story. And I'm so thankful that I ran into Patrick. He turned me on to all the hairy man stories of the YK Delta, which is this giant area that Bethel is kind of the hub of in southwestern Alaska. But it's this huge area, and hairy man stories just abound there. A hairy man ripping a dog in half, hairy man chucking rocks at people, hairy man getting shot by hunters, hairy man harassing hunters, a boy looking at hairy man. Just it never ends. They are just so far out there. I mean, Bethel's a small little town. All the other villages sometimes might only have a population of 60 to a couple hundred, and they're way spread out there, and there's nothing but hairy man sightings everywhere. And Patrick told me, I said, why aren't there more stories like this? Delta Discovery is one of the only publications done stories on this, and they kind of stopped the last couple of years. And he said, well, they don't want to talk about it. It's kept hush hush. The government doesn't want them to talk about it. And he actually said that. He said the government doesn't want them to talk about that, and that is kind of the attitude in that area. Now, what is very interesting to me as we get into the story of Gabriel Fox is that after World War II in rural Alaska, the National Guard and the Army had a huge presence, and we had tons of bases. Now you go to a lot of these rural villages and it's like a ghost town, and these bases are just empty bunkers because they, 80%, 90% of them went away. I hope they get built back up, but they just didn't see the need for it, in the decades after World War II. And so slowly the Army pulled out, but we still have these installations. I've seen some of them where it's, you've got a crew of 7 guys and there's just these giant buildings that are empty. But there was a big presence in the YK Delta of Army, and in the 60s, that's when there was a ton of Army there. And so this is the strangest story, because it's not just, there's a hairy man out there, there's a Bigfoot. It's about a runaway boy, is this teenager, Gabriel Fox. And all we have is it's a legend. It is not even an urban legend, it's a rural legend of the YK Delta, that Gabriel Fox was this troubled boy and he ran away. And he ran away with nothing. He didn't have shoes, he didn't have food, he didn't have anything. He just went out into the wilderness of Alaska, and in order to survive, the legend has it that he turned into a hairy man. Now that's just not, he grew hair all over his body. He turned big and ape-like, and he turned into a Sasquatch so he could survive. And then, this is the crazy part, the Army went after him and captured him, because they were intrigued, like, okay, this boy goes out in the woods and he's able to transform into Bigfoot. What's going on here? We need to capture him. We need to get a handle on this, and we need to study him. And so that's the last that was heard of Gabriel Fox. Now, I would like to investigate this a little more. Maybe Beans can help me with this to see, was he a real person? Were his family members still around? Were they still wondering where he is? His family members would be pretty old right now. But that was the end of the story, is that the Army took him away. So really interesting. It's not the only story we have of military killing or capturing these creatures. And I really think, I keep going back to it, shout out to Jomo, there's an interdimensional connection. There has to be, because otherwise none of this would be possible. We would already have bones, we'd have one captured, but they are able to phase out of existence. Rob Roy was saying sometimes they can morph their hair and turn it blonde and silvery and then reflect the surroundings around it, just like on Predator, the cloaking system that the Predator had. That's what we see. Some of these people actually say it looked like a cloaked predator, but that's what I keep coming back to. There's something odd, there's something unearthly, not of this world. These creatures are able to phase. Some of them are flesh and blood, and there's communities of them living out here, but some of them, something else is going on, and I think that's what kind of got the Army's interest, or the military's interest, whatever organization is out there hunting them, studying them, probably have one captured, but it is fascinating. So with all the stuff coming out about aliens and the whistleblowers, and we have reverse engineering their technology, recovered aliens and bodies, Project Serpo and all that, I do think that they have a Bigfoot. We don't as the public, but there's enough stories of hunters killing them and capturing them, and then that's when the military comes in and takes them, I think, especially up here when in the middle of nowhere. And that is why when you go into some of those regions, they don't want to talk about it. And that is what Patrick told me. He lived in that region for over 20 years. So fascinating. I'm not going to stop. We're going to continue with these investigations, these stories. I found out you can go on Facebook and email or call up Rob Roy at the Bigfoot Art Gallery. Look at his Facebook page, and you can order prints of his Bigfoot art that I feature in these videos. So thank you, Rob, for letting me feature them in these videos. And I actually bought one of his prints. He sells them for like $30. You can get an 8x10 print on foam core. But I'm going to do another episode on artwork for the Bigfoot, and I'm doing some of my own artwork. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But anyways, thank you. We've been doing these episodes every Sunday for 6 months now, and I'm not going to stop anytime soon. So I look forward to the time when the snow is gone, like 3 or 4 more months, and spring is here and the investigations will start, although I will have a couple surprise investigations for you. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I will see you next Sunday.